Last night, I heard a little boy beg his mom not to go into a liquor store. Reddit. What things have you overheard that have broken your heart? Story 1. A friend of mine got drunk at a barbecue. Kids and husband were there too. When it was explained to her that someone would drive her home, she went ballistic. They hurried her kids into my car, didn't have keys, just didn't want them to hear the cursing, ranting awfulness spewing from their mother. Her oldest son asked me what was wrong with her, and I explained, "Mommy just drank too much bad stuff and has made her sick. She's just sick right now, but she'll feel better later," he said. "Oh, she's drunk again." I felt so horrible. Her youngest was crying and she kept asking me, "How much longer until Mommy feels better?" I didn't know what to say. I hated everything about that night. Story 2. My daughter is just over 1 year old and we send her to an in-home daycare during the week while we're at work. There is another girl in daycare with her who has a physical handicap having to do with her legs. Her parents drop her off with a wheelchair and leg braces for assisted walking. She's an adorable little girl, always happy, and during normal playtime hours at daycare, she gets around by doing a mix of crawling and pulling herself around the room on the floor. One morning a few weeks ago, I dropped my daughter off and was talking to the woman who runs the daycare about how my daughter was starting to walk. The other little girl overheard me and she immediately turned and said, "No, I want Lily to stay on the floor with me." Broke my heart. Story 3. Woman has a gambling addiction and spends rent, food, bill money on slot machines. Does not see anything wrong with it. I don't know about immediately heartbreaking, but a woman came into the pawn shop where I work. She was a regular for around 3 years. She hadn't been back in a few weeks, so I was surprised when I saw her, but she needed a very large loan. Turns out she had hired a babysitter so that she could go downtown with her friends, and she didn't trust the sitter. So she took the cash that she had in her drawer for her rent, bills, food for her 2 small children in case the sitter went looking through her stuff. At first, I thought it was a silly thing to do, let alone having that much cash on you. But I'm used to these people not having bank accounts. Turns out it was an excuse. She took the money downtown and gambled away every last cent on VLT machines. She laughed about it. I told her that it was very serious, and she laughed it off and said, "Yeah, it's kind of an addiction, but what are you going to do?" The worst part was when she tried to tell me that I was responsible for her children's empty stomachs, and I wouldn't give her the loan amount she wanted. I see this kind of stuff so often. My job depresses me so much. Story 4. About a year ago, I was waiting for a train, and there was a bit of commotion around the train station. A police car was parked on one side, and someone was talking about how there was a girl on the tracks. When I was going up the stairs to get to my train, 2 police officers were dragging a girl that looked to be about 15, right past me. The way she cried was almost inhuman. Not so much crying as screaming incoherently. She was dressed in a bright pink jacket, and one of the officers tried to make some small talk to make her calm down. I heard him say something along the lines of, "What a nice jacket you have." She stopped screaming and crying just enough to reply. Her answer still haunts me today. "I wanted my parents to know who it was." Story 5. My mom runs the after-school program at her school for 3 to 6-year-olds. There was a mom of a 3-year-old boy who always came to pick him up at 5:59 p.m., 1 minute before aftercare ended, and she would ignore him completely, staring at her phone and then bark orders at him if he wasn't moving quickly enough. One day, he made some coloring or artwork thing and wanted to show it to her. She snatched it out of his hands, crumpled up the paper, and said, "Do you think I need to be bothered with this right now?" My mom ended up talking to the principal and having a school social worker meet with the mom about appropriate behavior on school property. But I still want to clock that lady. Story 6. I was in the queue once at a post office over in the UK. That happened to be in a WH Smith's, a stationery or book or gift store. And there was a lad about 10 years old ahead of me in the queue with his parents. He was dressed in a tracksuit, as were both his parents. Nothing wrong with a tracksuit, but it's almost become a uniform synonymous with chavs or, to put it bluntly, undesirables. Anyways, he was looking through some books that were on a shelf, and he picked up one and went over to his mother and told her that it was a book from a series they had been talking about in school, and he begged her to have it. She completely ignored him, so he turned to his dad, who clouted him over the head and told him books are for idiots. "What's the point of buying a book? Because once you've read it, it's done," he said. The kid then put it back on the shelf. I hastened to add the book cost £1.50. It was only about 10 pages long. I wanted to give the lad money for it, but I was actually scared in case it prompted either one of the parents to start on me. I was behind them in the queue for about 20 minutes and listened to them talking about fighting, heroin, getting drunk, and shoplifting. And the whole time the kid just stood there looking miserable. He was wearing a gold chain and sovereign ring, and I thought, this kid has no chance. I wanted to pause the world and give him a cuddle. Story 7. I was walking home from the store, didn't have a car at the time, about 5 years ago. This little boy who was probably around 4 or 5 and his mother were walking hand in hand somewhere, presumably to the park that was nearby. They aren't saying much, just talking about the trees and gardens outside people's houses. Things get quiet for a moment, and then the kid drops a bomb. "Mommy, why did Daddy die?" He didn't say in a sad tone, but was almost curious. The woman gets this really dejected look on her face, starts to cry and sort of picks up speed. It wasn't that she was deliberately trying to ignore his question, I just think she didn't have the words to explain to him. I thought about it for the rest of the way home, gave my dad a hug that night. Story 8. If you know your wife is an alco, don't bring her and your kid to an all-you-can-drink buffet. I work in a castle that holds medieval banquets, one side of which is that we give out free wine. It's 2.5 hours long, so if you try, you've got enough time to get pretty drunk. One day the banquet was finishing, and we were saying goodbye to the guests. This one woman was fairly trolleyed, knocking into the walls, knocking stuff off of them, and insulting me, my manager, and her manager who was up visiting. Her husband was out in the smoking area outside, ignoring the situation, apart from sending his probably 8-year-old son in to try and get her out of the building. "Come on, Mom, time to go. Dad says we have to leave now, the castle is closing," etc. I could hear in his voice that he'd seen this behavior repeatedly. It was pleading and sad, but resigned at the same time. So we get her out of the door. Myself and my colleagues went to change out of costumes and collected our tips. Maybe 5 minutes later, I left by the same door and headed to the car. I found the woman a few yards off the gravel path, face down in a large patch of briars. She'd gone to look at the view of the bay, the castle's beside the sea, slipped and falling completely into the thorns, covered in blood from 100 tiny cuts. The son was bleating like Simba, trying to wake up Mufasa after the stampede. "Come on, Mom, you can do it. Just try to stand up. I know you can, Mom. Please. Please just try, Mom." I don't know how he held it together. There were tears in his voice, if not in his eyes. And the freaking dad? He was down at the road at the end of the path, maybe 60 yards away, leaning on a wall, smoking a cigarette without a care in the world. I walked down to him and hissed at him to go get his car and drive it to the foot of the path, as his wife was incapable of walking to the car park. He was aloof as freaking Viserys Targaryen, and nonchalantly sauntered off to the car park. Me and 2 other staff members managed to get her upright, and I cleaned up her cuts with a medkit from work. She was out of her mind by this point, laughing and gurgling and wiping her freaking blood over us, and her kid was embarrassed and ashamed and crying nearly. God, I was simultaneously so sad and angry driving home after work that night. Story 9. Drug-addict mom, non-committed dad, and a sad little kid who changed our lives. For my son's 9th birthday, I took my son and a handful of friends to the movies, then to pizza, then they all slept over. On the way home from pizza, the kids were commenting on how great the night was, and were saying thank you, etc. I said in reply, "We love having kids over." Out of the blue, one boy quietly whispered to me, "My mom doesn't love me." Broke my heart into bits. I asked why he said that, and he said, "She always left me. I would wake up and she would be gone." Come to find out, he had just been placed with his dad whom he barely knew. The state had taken him away from his mom for neglect, leaving him every night alone to go to the bar. It had been going on for years, and the neighbors would hear him crying alone and call the cops. She's a raging alcoholic and a drug addict still. His dad had only met him once before and was currently living with a new girlfriend. And she didn't like kids. His son was now sleeping on the floor of the girlfriend's apartment, and there was no room for him. It was freaking heartbreaking. To make matters worse, he sat alone every day after school on the steps of the library, waiting for his dad, sometimes till past 7 p.m. When I found out, I had him over every single day, eating a snack, doing homework together with my son, and eating dinner most nights. Less than a year later, his father asked if I could take him for a while. He had broken off with his girlfriend and had nowhere to go, and nowhere to bring his son. No problem. I'm a single mom of 1 son, but I always have room for anyone who needs to stay. His dad brought over all of his clothes in a garbage bag, everything he owns. He never officially was mine, but I became his adopted mom since that time, bringing him to the doctors, going to parent-teacher conferences, music concerts, etc. He's 19 now and doing fantastic. He made it through high school at an honors AP level and then went to college in a full scholarship. But better than that, he's an awesome person. Funny, smart, kind, and loving. I love my adopted son. From that one act, I became known as the mom who takes in kids. I ended up with 4 semi-adopted kids who stayed with us right through graduation. All teenage boys the same age, all with severe family problems, but it was awesome, and each is doing very, very well. Story 10. I have a very good friend who is a single mom. She is basically written off the father of her son, who knocked her up and basically has seen the kid once since he was born. She really didn't want this guy in her life anyway, and released him from having to pay child support in the exchange for sole custody of the boy. When he was about 10 years old, we were all together in my car and he was sitting in the back seat. For whatever reason, his mother and I were talking about things we were planning to do that summer. And I told her that from the time I was 10 until I went into high school, I would go fishing with my dad and grandfather on the beach near Big Sur where I grew up. I said that those were some of my fondest memories of my grandfather and dad, just being guys out on the shore, fishing and listening to the radio. Looking in the rearview mirror, I could see tears welling up in her son's eyes. When I asked him if everything was okay, he didn't answer and just looked away. His mom quietly told me that his biological dad had told him that he would take him fishing the last time they talked on the phone. She said that was 3 years ago, and he hasn't heard from him since. No birthday cards, no phone calls, just gone out of their lives. So I told him, "Hey, I can take you fishing. I still have the rod I used when I was your age, and I can get my dad's fishing pole the next time I go home to visit my parents. Does that sound like a good idea?" He looked so happy to hear that, then said something to his mom that just tore my heart in two. He said, "Mom, I'll probably never see my real dad ever again, but now I don't want to." He pointed to me and said, "Can he be my dad from now on?" We've gone fishing every summer since then for the last 3 years. Not only that, I've helped him with his homework and school projects and basically been a role model for him ever since. Yesterday, as we were driving around in my car, he saw some of his friends walking in the sidewalk going our direction. He slowly ducked into his seat. I asked what he was doing and he said, "Dude, I can't be seen having my dad drive me around. That's just not cool." I've never been prouder of my adopted son, doing exactly what I would have done when I was 14. Story 11. About half a dozen times over the last few years, I've received a phone call first thing on a Saturday or Sunday morning from the kid. The kid is often crying and always asks, "Mom, when are you coming home?" It breaks my heart every time I have to tell that kid he has the wrong number. Story 12. I didn't overhear this, but it seems similar. When I was a child, my brother used to kick the crap out of me every day when my parents weren't home. It wasn't just fighting, it was torture. He used to tie me up, shoot me with BB guns, whip me with tea towels and elastic bands, having a huge elastic band phobia these days, heat up teaspoons in the cooker and put them on my legs, etc. Not nice, especially seeing as I am a girl 3 years his junior. One day my mom was out for a rare night out playing darts and my dad was supposed to stay home with us. I think I was about 9 or 10. He's an alcoholic, so nothing will stand in his way of going to the pub, which was right at the bottom of my road, so he wasn't far away. I think he thought that made it okay. Well, my brother had been hinting at what he was going to do when my dad went out. Sitting in the living room, he had a BB gun on his lap covered by a magazine, which he kept showing me subtly. Needless to say, I was terrified. I begged my dad not to go out, crying and pleading. I never used to grasp my brother, no matter what he did. But I was so scared that I was crying and crying, asking my dad to stay home just this once. He knew what was up, but he ignored it and went out anyway. I sat at his bedroom window and watched him leave. My neighbor saw me and told me years later it was the saddest thing he had seen because I was obviously so scared. Needless to say, I was terrorized as expected. Story 13. I was at Kroger at about 8 p.m. one evening. I had just gotten off work and needed to get my son some Alimentum before heading home. While walking through the produce section, I noticed 2 women with 5 children. The women looked awful, very thin with dirty hair and clothes, and their faces were scabbed. That could have been meth heads. 3 of the 5 children they had with them did not have shoes on. Their cart was full of soda, beer, pizza rolls, etc. There was a small toddler in the seat of the cart. He was asking his mom if he could have a banana. The mom ignored him and kept talking to her friend. The boy asks again for a banana, saying, "Mama, I'm so hungry. I have nana?" Again, the meth mom ignored him. The boy reached over and tried to grab a banana, and the mom slapped his little hand so hard, grabbed his face, and screamed, "You don't touch that! That's not for you! You grab something again, I'ma beat your ass in front of everyone here!" Then shoved his head backward. The toddler shrank down into a ball and hugged himself and whispered, "I'm so hungry, Mama." The mother ignored him again. My heart started banging in my chest. The poor baby was hungry. It was 8 p.m. and you know he hadn't had dinner yet. Hell, by the looks of his mom, he may not have eaten at all that day. That witch was pushing around a cart full of trash and didn't want to spend a lousy 25 cents on a piece of fruit for her kid. I followed that witch around the entire store with my cell phone set to take a picture, waiting for her to hurt her kid again. I fantasized about grabbing the little guy and taking him home and giving him a bath, clean clothes that fit, and feeding him a hot meal. She didn't slap him again, but I listened to her whole conversation about how she was going to drop her kids off with their useless dad so she and her friend could go party. When they got up to the checkout, they were unloading their groceries, when the little boy tried to help set items in the belt. The mom went nuts again, yelling at her kid and went to grab his arm. When she noticed me holding my phone up to take a pic, she let go, paid for her groceries with her Ohio directional card, and left. When they were out of the door, the cashier looked at me with sad eyes and said, "I saw you following them. Too bad you didn't get that picture. Some people should not be allowed to breed." I did follow them outside and saw them getting on the city bus. I went back into the store to pay for my goods and asked the clerk if there was any way to look up the last customer because of the shopper's cards they use. I did get her name and called CPS. I was told, "We will look into it." I never heard anything else. In the state of Ohio, you're allowed as a parent to discipline your children. It is only considered abuse if you use a closed fist, leave bruises, break bones, etc. Corporal punishment is considered abuse, but not slapping your child. Sad, isn't it? I did what I could. Her name is in their system now. I went home and cried as I rocked my son, thinking about that hungry little boy and wondering if he ever got dinner. Story 14. A cashier at a grocery store. A guy comes in with 2 carts full of just every kind of junk food you can imagine. Everything is microwavable and there's not a vegetable or fruit to be seen. It's all utter crap, and $400 worth of it too. The guy has his 5 children with him, probably about 2 years apart each. The oldest is 10, and he's helping by pushing the other cart. They pull into my register and start unloading. All the while, the 10-year-old boy and 8-year-old girl are talking to their dad. They're trying to keep their voices down, but I can hear them saying, "Dad, this isn't good food. We need good food, and this will be all of our money." The dad shushes them and tells them he knows what he's doing and it's all fine. They pay with food stamps, and I can see on the computer that it's all their money for the month, gone in one order. The 10-year-old is on the verge of tears while he's pushing the cart, telling his dad that none of this will last them, and now they don't have any more money. Story 15. Boy asks for a toy for Christmas. His mom says no because they need money for food. The kid isn't even upset. I was at the toy store one Christmas buying presents for my family with my friends. I was in the small boys' toy section and was looking at some toy soldiers for my cousin. I hear a young mother and her son talking quietly. As they walk slowly by, looking at everything, I heard the son say, "Look, Mammy, that man, 16-year-old me, is buying presents. Can we buy some too?" And the mother replies softly with a tear in her eye, "No, sorry, Aiden. We need money for food." The kid didn't even seem disappointed, probably so used to not getting anything. They just carried on walking. I was so upset I immediately checked out and caught up with him and gave the little boy the toy soldiers. He was so happy. I thought the mother would say no, as they usually do in these type of situations, but she saw how happy her boy was. She just said thank you, with tears of joy this time. Yeah, I told you all about something good I did. I'm a smug bastard. But I couldn't go home knowing that kid had nothing, so shoot me. Story 16. Not exactly overheard, but last week I was chilling out at a buddy's house. At around midnight, a bunch of cop cars and an ambulance show up at his neighbor's house. We notice the cops are talking to the little boy who lives there. We know the boy pretty well. He's a good friend of my buddy's son. We're going to call him Martin, and he's about 7. After the police leave, Martin is sitting outside and we call him over to see if everything is okay. Martin's grandpa lives with him, so we assume something happened to him because of the ambulance. But as soon as we say, "Hey Martin, what was going on there?" he instantly yells, "Nobody hit me. My daddy doesn't hit me." It made us so sad. Story 17. I overheard a maintenance worker in my apartment arguing with his drunk wife one night. Her son, his stepson, about 5 years old, yelled, "I hate you. You're not my dad." Pretty sure the guy started crying afterward. He's such a nice guy too. Story 18. It's a shame to admit, but my family has a drinking problem on both sides of the gene pool. My little cousin, she's around 12 or so at the time, came up to her mom, my aunt, crying. Her mother asked what was wrong, and this little girl just grabs her mom's leg and say, "Dad is drinking beer. That means he's going to hurt you tonight, Mommy." My eyes just swelled up as I choked back the tears and walked away. Story 19. I was at the local casino around 15 years ago. They were dragging a woman out for causing a disturbance. She was yelling, "He's spending our rent money." Apparently, he was at the table and wouldn't stop playing and she was trying to interrupt it. Made me super sad. I think the real sadness here is that the manager would still allow someone to play after this.